Hello, everyone. This is BritSimon. So I often, at the beginning of each year, I tend to find that a lot of people ask questions which makes it very clear to me that they've not read the instructions. Um, there are actually quite good instructions on almost every aspect of the DV lottery process. The instructions may not necessarily make sense, and in fact, in some places, they directly contradict the reality. But it's really essential that you read the instructions and follow them as much as possible. And then in some cases, there will be some areas where I can offer some tips and explain some areas of the instructions that either don't make sense or you should not worry about certain instructions. But it is essential, as I say, that you read the instructions, that you act according to the instructions, and that you demonstrate that you actually did follow the instructions in some cases. So I often will be finding myself responding to people in the new year, and we're now in the DV 2023 processing year. In the new year of the DV process, I find myself responding a lot of times as read the instructions. People ask me a question, depending on how busy I am, or sometimes even my mood, I'll just say read the instructions, because I get kind of frustrated that people are asking questions which they would not ask if they had actually taken a few minutes to read the instructions. So a fair enough question, though, is which instructions? Where are the instructions? What should I do? Well, okay, so I'm going to show where I would be looking if I were you for the instructions, and try and talk you through some of the important places. Okay, so let me add my screen. Share screen. Do this one. Okay, the first place that you should be looking, let's put that back in. The first place that you should be looking for the instructions is this site. In fact, if you just Google if you are selected, right? If you just type in that, it actually comes up with this link. Now, you could also get that link from your original 1NL, the letter that says, congratulations, you're selected. So you can just come to this site, and this is the first place that you look for instructions. And basically, on this website, you can see that they take you through a flow, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They take you through a flow, which is the rough order of events and things that go on. So many times people say, "Oh, I've just submitted my DS260. What do I do next?" Well, what you should have done before you asked me that question was you should have come here and you should have seen the order in which they expect you to do things, for example. You could also have looked at my guides about the process, and but you didn't. You just asked a question. Okay, let's try and do better, though. Okay, so you can see here, for example, submit the entry. That's just about submitting the entry online. Then it talks about the selection of applicants if you are selected. So if you've got a case number, you've been selected, right? And you're supposed to confirm your qualifications. If you've listened to my earliest videos about, when I release on the first day of the year, the first day people are selected, I always say to people, look, slow down. Many of you are going to rush to submit your DS260, but firstly, you need to think about, are you going to be able to get approved in this process? And so you should think about your qualifications. And we're not just talking about educational qualifications. We're talking, did you fill in the form correctly when you enter the lottery and all of those things? But think through your qualifications, whether you meet the requirements for the lottery process itself. Then you submit your application, which is the DS260. And in here, step 6 says submit the supporting documents. Now, as I've mentioned in a video a few days ago, I'm not 100% sure yet that DV 2023 will be required to submit documents. We'll find out over the next few weeks. But this particular guide still lists that submit your documents. But to be clear, that's been that way for several years. They didn't take that section of the instructions away for the DV 2022 folks, for example, that were told to submit their documents. So please don't bother telling me that the letter says that you don't need to, the confirmation from the DS260 says you don't need to submit the documents, or the selected letter says you do need to submit. Please don't bother telling me, right? I understand all the stuff that it says, but still, I want to see proof of what they're actually going to do this year. Okay, and believe me, there's nothing you know about this program I don't already know. Trust me on that. So it kind of cracks me up when people say, yeah, you said this, but it says this here. Just assume that I know what it says here, and I've still said what I said. Okay. So submitting supporting documents here in step 6. Then it talks about the interview, but actually in step 8, it talks about preparing for the interview. So this is where they're scheduling the interview, right? So they schedule the interview, you prepare for the interview, that's gathering some more documents together. Then you have the interview and you hopefully get approved, all right? That's the rough cycle. But if you come through and you look at this document, so for example, in the prepare for the interview section, there's a great link here that you should be looking at, which is, and if I open this link, this is a list of embassies and the consulates, and you find your embassy and you say, okay, well, I'm expecting to interview at Buenos Aires. Okay, so are there specific instructions for Buenos Aires? That would be listed here. Okay, and so they tell you all sorts of things. For example, including the physicians that they they insist on you using for their location, right? So there's a whole bunch of information here: a pre-interview checklist, medical exam instructions, whether you need to register your appointment online. So for every embassy, there is a set of instructions. So along with the generic instructions, you need to be reading the embassy specific instructions. And if I were you, I would be looking at that months in advance. Don't just wait for your 2NL. Have a look at that at least one time, way in advance, so you understand what responsibilities you'll have for your interview as well. Okay, so go ahead and study that. In the submit supporting documents section, which, as I say, you may or may not be asked to submit documents this year in DV 2023, I don't know yet, but nevertheless, you have to prepare the same set of documents, right? So your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your passport, divorce certificates if you're divorced, military service documentation if you served in the military, police certificates, not only from the country that you're in now, but potentially from other countries from before. You might have more than one police certificates. Quite a few documents, right? And basically, all of these documents, they tell you what will be required in this instruction. So again, I get lots of people saying, please tell me the list of documents that will be required. Well, the list of documents that will be required in your case is not necessarily the same as any other case. Okay, so you need to figure out what list of documents you will be expected to provide. When you go into that, you'll see here, for example, it talks about, this is one that people ask about all the time, is police certificates. Do I have to submit a police certificate for this country? I was living there 11 months, or I lived there, 18 months or whatever else. People ask me these questions all the time, but there's a really clear example and description of when you need a police certificate right here in the instructions, if you bother to read it. Okay, so please go and read that and understand that. Honestly, it makes a big difference if you can do that. It also explains about the birth certificates, what to do, and it should have the names of both parents. That in the UK is called a long form birth certificate. It's similar in some other countries, but the fact that it's got both a space on the birth certificate for both parents' names, that's important. And that it's the birth certificate is issued by the appropriate authority. The appropriate authority is the country where you were born, right? So there you go. And then it talks about what happens if you've got unattainable birth certificates. It talks about court and prison records, military records, and so on. Lots of information there, right? So there's a ton of information there. including the link that takes you to the web page for each of the consulates. But another really important thing that's listed here is the link to the reciprocity by country page. So this is a generic list of what documents you're expected to provide, but you may not know how to obtain your birth certificate in your country, or your police certificate for your country or some other country. So again, I tend to get a lot of questions about that. And 100% of the time, I'm going to tell you to go and look at the reciprocity page. So again, if you Google reciprocity page, if you Google the word reciprocity page, the first thing that comes up here is the reciprocity page link. Okay. And in here, you'll find all of the countries listed. So let's just have a look at a couple. Let's have a look at Algeria, for example, right? So all of the countries are listed. And in there, it will talk about what general documents are needed, how to get the birth certificate, and then, marriage certificates, etc. All the information is there, where to apply, what fees are there, and so on. Police certificates. How do you get a police certificate, right? And again, it talks about all the documents and the process for getting it. Earlier on in this video, I said sometimes you're going to need to show that you have complied with the regulations or with the instructions on how to obtain certain documents. That is never more true than with regard to police certificates. You have to go through the process and document the steps that you've taken to go through the process, because you need to show that you've followed their instructions. It doesn't matter whether your buddy Sam says he knows better, right? Ignore Sam. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Forget him, right? Follow the instructions that are laid out here, because here, if you show that you followed their instructions, they can't refuse you because you followed their instructions and the authority failed to give you the police certificate, right? As long as you can show that you've done that in a timely manner according to their instructions. So it's important you follow these instructions. Now, sometimes, let's go back, you can see there's lots of information here, right? And you need to go and look at that. So if you were raised in Algeria and you live there now, then you're going to be looking at the Algerian reciprocity page for the answers. If, however, you used to live in France and you lived there for more than a year, let's say, you would have to also be looking at the French page, right, to find out about how you obtain a police certificate there. And there are some pages, and India is an example that I always think of immediately. India is an example where if you go to their page and you talk about police prison records, you follow the process. It talks about what, how you get the police certificate. And it talks about all Indian nationals aged 16 and above residing in India, blah, blah, blah. Then Indian nationals residing abroad. It talks about non-Indian applicants residing in India who are registered, non-Indian applicants who are not registered with this particular authority. And then it says here, if you keep on reading, down here, it says police certificates are only available for Indian nationals and non-Indian nationals currently living in India, right? Indian police certificates are not available for foreign non-Indian nationals applying outside of India. So if you used to live in India and you're not Indian, you can't get a police certificate. That doesn't mean you've got a problem. That's what the government know, right? So in that case, you're not expected to provide the police certificate for India because according to the American government, you can't obtain it. So you don't have to go through and pay some lawyer in India to apply for a document that the government don't expect you to produce. Do you understand? By following the instructions, you're actually, and if you read it properly, if you take the few minutes to actually read it properly, you may find that you don't need all of the documents that you thought you needed. Okay. Sometimes you'll see the words not available, right? On police certificates, it might say not available. If that's the case, and let me find one, I think Syria is probably one like that. Let me see. Syria. I'm just guessing that Syria may not be one, but sometimes they say, okay, so here it says available to Syrian citizens, blah, 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 but maybe unavailable to citizens living outside the country. The words not available or unavailable means they don't expect you to provide that document. Okay. Again, very important that you understand that. So whether it's the Indian format where they say you're not going to be able to get a police certificate for that group of people, or whether on the reciprocity page it says not available or unavailable, any of those words. If it says those words, then you're not expected to provide it. Okay. The same thing can happen for other documents, marriage and divorce and death certificates and all of those things, right? There's a bunch of certificates that may be and documents that may be important in your case, but you have to go through the instructions to figure out exactly what you in your particular case should provide. Okay. So if you've picked up anything from this video, it should be the simple answer that you should read the instructions. Okay. First of all, read those main instructions. Second of all, glance at or read casually the embassy-specific instructions that are listed from those main instructions. But most importantly, at an early stage, even before you're very far into this, you should be looking at the reciprocity page for any country that you've lived in, either now or previously. Okay. Particularly where you realize you're going to have to provide certain documents for the interview. And some of those documents will be required possibly in advance of the interview if the document procedure is in place this year. So the sooner you start reading the instructions and understanding what documents you're going to need, and make a list of them, right? And what steps you've taken to obtain all of those things. As soon as you understand that for your case, the better off you'll be. The more prepared you'll be at the interview. Now, just one last thing I would say. The instructions, as I mentioned earlier, don't say everything. So, for example, there are some places where you may be asked for an I-134. The I-134 is not listed in any of those places I just showed you, right? Although it may actually be listed on Sri Lankan webpage, embassy-specific instructions, because there are a few very small number of embassies that insist on that. But there are some things that you can provide at the interview that won't necessarily be listed, and those things you're just expected to know. It might be financial documents, maybe the I-134. There may be other documents that are important to your case. There's no harm in over preparing for the interview, right? There's no harm in taking more documents than you need for the interview. You have to take the bare minimum. But you can also take additional documents that you feel may give you a better chance of being approved. The DS-5535, for example, in some countries is commonly requested after the interview. If you take that to the interview, you may find you'll cut down the waiting time after your interview. Okay, so there are some tips and there are some smart ways of behaving that you can do that will actually, improve the chances of getting your case through. And that's really what I want you to think about. So at this point, for DV 2023 people, go and have a look at all of the instructions. Please read that through completely. Make sure you understand everything. And then at the very least, it will reduce the number of questions that I have to answer where my answer is going to be read the instructions, because that's what I will tell you in many, many cases. Okay? All right, everybody, thanks for your time today. Please do subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up on this video if you like this particular video, and also give me some feedback. What other videos or information do you think you need in order to make your case more successful? Please let me know. I'd be interested in that list of questions as well. All right, thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now.